Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Manish. I am part of GrowX Ventures, an early stage deep tech fund, and I'm also a volunteer at India DeepTech, an informal alliance to promote deep tech startup ecosystem growth in India, where these are startups focused on scientific research and engineering innovation. The whole India deep tech community includes dozens of deep tech startups, incubators, VCs, corporate VCs, and generally others, having interest in the deep tech space. So there are multiple elements and ideas behind bringing all of these stakeholders under one roof to allow for more and open conversations around building deep tech businesses out of India, to allow all the deep tech startups to ask for and get help and provide help to other startups in solving their individual challenges, as well as to discuss industry level challenges and finding solutions together. We have multiple initiatives running under India Deep Tech. The latest one is Deep Tech Liftoff to promote more conversations around deep tech. In this, we have multiple sessions going on this week. We had one on Monday on industrial automation. We have the one today on expanding the horizons of healthcare. We'll have one on Friday on mobility. We'll share more details around that soon. Ayesha will be the moderator for this panel. So I'll request Ayesha to, please introduce herself, the panel, and start the conversation. Just a couple of things before, Ayesha gets into and starts this. One is that this session is being recorded. And the second is that if any of the attendees have any questions, please drop them in the chat box, and Ayesha and the rest of the team will take them up as they come along. And maybe the first 40-45 minutes will go with the flow, and then towards the end there'll be a separate session for the Q&A. Yeah. So Ayesha, please.
Thank you so much, Manish. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ayesha Chaudhary, a healthcare researcher and innovator by training, and a government employee by profession, at least for now. I did a medtech startup back in 2012 when it wasn't considered that cool to be a tech co-founder. But I also worked in the industry and now with the government. It's a pleasure to be here this evening, and I'm going to be extracting valuable insights for the entrepreneurs that we have today in the audience from our deep tech experts to help these entrepreneurs decrease the mortality of their startups, if I can put it that way. So feel free, as Mani said, to post questions in the chat box and we shall get you the answers. I personally believe that India still lives in 3 different centuries, and you experience it as you travel from tier 1 cities to towns and villages. But the good news is that deep tech innovations are reducing this gap. So let's use today's conversation to explore how we can leverage the deep science and deep tech to transform India's healthcare sector. And what's very interesting in today's panel is that we have a mix of people who have not followed a traditional career path of sticking to one profession for 40 years. They instead got off the path of least resistance, pivoted, and ventured into newer journeys. So on that note, I'd like to welcome and introduce our first panelist, Dr. Ramesh Brayapaneni, the Managing Director for Endiya, which is a fund that supports companies between angel and Series A rounds. Dr. Ramesh is a cardiologist turned venture capitalist, and both of which professions are high risk, high impact, and of course, lots of money. So we have to look out for lots of good advice from him. In his prior engagements, he has invested in companies like One Breath, which is into mechanical ventilation. And he's also an angel investor with NephroPlus, which is India's largest chain of dialysis clinics. He's also the founding director of Hyderabad Angels. So welcome, Dr. Ramesh. Good to have you with us.
Thanks, Ayesha.
Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Charit Bhograj, the founder and CEO of Tricog, which is one of the world's largest predictive healthcare analytics firm. They focus on streamlining cardiac patient care using cutting-edge AI technology. Dr. Charit is an interventional cardiologist and comes with an experience of 15 years. And what makes him extraordinary is his ability to multitask. So, again, lots of good advice to look out for from a multitasker, especially in today's busy world. Welcome, Dr. Charit.
Thank you very much, Ayesha.
And next, I move on to Miss Geetha Manjunath. I'd like to welcome her. She's the founder and CEO of Niramai Health Analytics, a Bangalore based startup that provides non invasive, radiation free breast cancer screening through AI. Geetha is an entrepreneur by profession and a computer scientist and business specialist by training. She comes with over 25 years of experience in IT innovation. She has led multiple AI projects at Xerox Research and HP India. So, to her, we must pick our brain to understand if in real the humanity is on the verge of entering a super automated world driven by AI and IoT. And I think, in fact, that was also one of the questions that I gotten from the group. So, welcome, Geetha.
Thank you. Nice to be on the panel.
To bring in a global perspective, I am delighted to welcome Mr. Kiran Mysore, our fourth panelist, who is a principal member at UTEC, a Japanese venture capital firm. They work closely with academia in Japan, including the University of Tokyo, and support pioneer technology ventures. Kiran is an AI researcher turned VC. He focuses on seed investments in IT and healthcare. And in his previous engagement, he supported over 50 deep tech Asian startups by connecting them with Japanese corporations. So, entrepreneurs, if you need big money and a global business, please be on the lookout for his unique insights. Welcome, Kiran.
Thanks to be part of the panel. I'm joining from Tokyo. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you. All right. Like I said, we have great thinkers and great doers this evening in the panel. And in the audience, we have about 60% entrepreneurs and 15% investors, is what I understood. So let's get started. And I'll request all panelists to articulate their thoughts in about 4 to 5 minutes in the interest of time. I'll come to the entrepreneurs first, Dr. Charit and Geetha. So, as I understand, India is at rank 46 on the Global Innovation Index, which is a huge jump of about 40 levels that we have gotten over the last 7 years. And as a country, we now intend to build on the success of the COVID vaccine story, become a global leader in digital healthcare and medical devices. And we also see the government investing huge amounts in deep tech these days through the AI mission, quantum computing mission, and cyber physical mission. So definitely the germination of deep tech mindset has started to happen in India. So coming to you first, Dr. Charit, I understand that your vision is to transform the current statistics and perception on heart attacks. At present, there is 80% of chance of losing life due to a heart attack, but you intend to transform it to an 80% chance of surviving a heart attack, which is absolutely transformative and bold. So the question is, what are the challenges of building a deep tech business in healthcare sector in India? And is India ready to absorb these homegrown cutting edge innovations? Over to you, Dr. Charit.
Thanks very much, Ayesha, and it's great to be on an amazing panel with well wishers and friends together. India is at a crossroad, and the crossroads is the fact that deep tech is being taken seriously for the first time in very many years. Especially in healthcare, where the application of deep tech has and will significantly change lives, will significantly impact the way we live our lives, the way diseases are diagnosed. Deep tech has a very unique place in India. And the challenges, and I'll very quickly articulate, are I would say, come under two buckets. The first bucket, which has been solved only recently, is the support that you have as an entrepreneur to raise funding, to get guidance. How do you start a deep tech? To get co-founders. This, as you very well know, was a challenging task even 5 years earlier. But thanks to the work that people like Dr. Ramesh and Kiran and so many other people are doing, people have realized that, yes, there is a great future of deep tech here in India. Prior to this, it was only, hey, if you're going to do something in AI, you have to either be in the valley or you have to be in Israel. Right? India has a very, very unique advantage, and I'm sure Geetha will allude more to that. So the first part, I do believe most of the challenge of acceptance of deep tech and creating an ecosystem to support deep tech is definitely getting solved. We still have a long way to go, and the government as well has taken unique steps towards that. The second are the facts that once you do have a product, and especially in the healthcare system, one of the most unique and difficult challenges that are still remains to be solved is a distribution challenge. You may have the best product in the world, but getting it out there in the healthcare space where hyper growth, as in other verticals, is actually a very bad thing, is an uphill task and a challenge that every entrepreneur will go to. We do not have a unified distribution channel. The access to doctors, access to healthcare systems are fragmented and completely offline, unlike other verticals. So not just your ability to create the technology, but getting it out there has a lot of scope for improvement. And I'm hoping that some of these initiatives will help entrepreneurs gain access to patients solving their problems. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Charit. I really like when you said that the acceptance of deep tech is increasing in India. I think that's a good positive note to start.
Absolutely. And to add, you would have doctors who would say, I would rather have an American piece of technology than an Indian piece of technology, right? Knowing fully well that ours may be even far better than what any other country produces. So I am optimistic about the decade ahead for us.
Sounds good. And with that, I'll now invite Geetha to share her thoughts. And I also want you, Geetha, to tell us that if we have enough high quality talent available in deep tech, and if not, how do we really address that for a country like India? Because I remember when I started up, it was extremely hard to attract talent to startups. How is it now?
Sure. So, sort of building on what Dr. Charit mentioned about challenges for creating deep tech healthcare startups, right? I agree with all the points that Dr. Charit mentioned. Additionally, I think just to sort of expand on a few parts, right? So when you're doing a deep tech healthcare, especially focusing on clinical decision support, right, which both Charit and Niramai is doing, is to try to use AI kind of algorithms and sophisticated sort of smart software rather, to actually guide the doctor to make a kind of a screening or a diagnostic decision. Sometimes maybe it is working autonomously, particularly for triaging and so on. So in this case, clinical efficacy of the test becomes very important, proving the clinical efficacy, that it actually works, right? And so this actually means systematic clinical studies, So one good thing about India is, yes, it is sort of, because of the sheer volume of patients, it's really possible to do clinical studies. And then now most of the, international companies are coming here to do the studies. The patient base is there. Very few doctors are really forthcoming to do innovative work because it's, there are really good ones, but that percentage is very less who want to do research, right? And then the benefit of doing research, enjoying creating new stuff and so on. Because there's so much of volume of patients, this kind of, really most of them are so busy with, treating the patients, which is obviously very, very important. And finding time and so on is an issue. So this is one aspect I just want to add to what Charit earlier mentioned. And the second aspect on, in terms of investors, yes, there are investors who are willing to sort of, invest in deep tech. And we do have two of them right here on this wonderful panel. Having said that, I think, especially when you're after the angel funding and Series A and you go to Series B, C, right? Typically, we have to look outside India, right? So that's sort of the other part. And then because it's really, if you're looking at a hockey curve growth in revenue in the first 2 years, it's usually not for a really deep tech healthcare company, because you need to spend that time and effort and money on the clinical efficacy. And also, of course, regulatory clearance. For India, it's slightly easier. But if you really want to innovate for the world, regulatory clearances for FDA, US FDA, or CE marking, it's not like it doesn't happen overnight. It requires the clinical studies, requires your company to be an ISO certified company, and so on and so forth. It has its own. It's a fun thing, and it's a lot of learning on the ground. But yes, that takes its own time, right? And so people who have the patience to serve patients, and invest in serving patients is, and also valuing deep tech alone is also more outside India than inside, I would say. On the selling part of it, I agree with Charit when he said, finding a network of doctors, maybe a network of hospitals may be an issue. But the approach one would take for a healthcare company to get into the market is also different from how you do it for other domain startups, such as you need to find the key opinion leaders in this space, who get convinced by doing the studies and so on, so that they can actually sort of, help you at least influence the customers at the time, almost at the verge of their making a decision. I mean, not to actually get to them, but at least help us in, ensuring that there is trust built up in the new solution. Last but not the least is also, if you want to hire people for selling, right? Sales itself, it's a concept sell, right? It's really, you have to convince people about AI, convince doctors, convince hospital staff. So as it is, enterprise sale itself is sort of in a long cycle. And with a healthcare piece coming in with a novel, let's say in our case, cancer screening solutions, nowhere in the world being used, right? That's the kind of thing we're developing. And that has its own way of answering, like the sales people need to be almost clinically so effective as our clinical team, right? They need to be able to answer all the questions and, based on the data that we have and so on. So all of this put together, and you had this question about hiring piece, which is interesting question, especially when you say AI, mainly because, of course, we do have talent. We do have people who are interested in solving interesting healthcare problems using AI. And we do have people coming in, and we have method of the method that we use is to first get them as interns. And thankfully, like Tricog, Niramai and all have actually sort of made good, news, I guess, the rewards and recognition. That makes, interns want to spend some time in our company so that they can work on it. They can say they've worked on a deep tech healthcare company so that they can get admissions outside easier. I mean, we have many interns applying to, and then many times these interns sort of, want to stay back because they've seen the culture, they've seen the wonderful, challenging work that they can do and research they can do. And so that's sort of the best way we've been able to attract talent and retain them. And also it gives us an opportunity to try them out before we actually hire, which is very useful for us. Of course, if you want to just sort of get people by just doing a job description and so on, it is challenging because there are so many companies out there who are paying at least 4 or 5 times higher than what a startup can pay. It's really so unless people are coming in to solve interesting, challenging problems for the world, it's pure scientist, kind of employee is difficult to get. Yeah,
it's a good,
but it's fun. It's a lot of learning, and people should. I mean, it should not discourage people from doing healthcare.
Sure, and I think it's a good win-win if students want to just come spend some time as interns, get a feel of it, further refine their skills, and go to universities, and you also get your work done. So I think that's a good spot to be in.
Yeah.
And
can I make a quick comment? And
sure,
one
please.
of the challenges probably missed by oversight by Dr. Charit and Geetha.
Sure.
That is the regulatory approvals, whether it is CE or FDA. Why I want to bring it up is India has a lot of FDA approved API pharmaceutical companies, active pharmaceutical ingredients. But when it comes to deep tech, whether it's medical devices, digital health, AI, or even new drugs, probably there are 1,000 FDA approvals in the United States. Probably entire India put together, probably maybe 20 products would have been approved at the highest. I may be wrong slightly. But the question is, there'll be hundreds of consultants available in the US. So many of the Indian startups in deep tech and life sciences are finding it little challenging in navigating the regulatory pathway. While they may know overall the guidance, the hand-holding which a US startup or an Israeli startup or a Chinese startup has, I think that probably that is still very immature. Probably in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll have some consultants able to guide the Indian startup entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning as a part of the clinical study. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Ramesh. I think that was quite interesting. In fact, I'll just continue on that particular thought where he was saying that regulatory approvals in India and across. So why don't we spend some time now in understanding, how different is this healthcare technology ecosystem in other countries like Japan, US, Europe, and even African countries, specifically around 3 factors. One, of course, the policy, how enabling policies are in different countries, then the R&D and innovation ecosystems that they have for deep tech, and the procurement of startup products. So maybe we can just pick up on some of those threads now with you, Dr. Ramesh.
I think definitely the Western market. I don't want to club Africa along with Japan, US, and Europe. I think maybe take the advanced countries like US, Europe, Japan. And I think any product starts with the regulatory approval. There's no doubt about it. Even for example, an Indian deep tech company, my advice would be to get the FDA/CE. Probably I think the delta between the FDA and the CE is quite getting narrowed down. Even the CE, the new regulations are expecting the clinical trials to be done. So I think even if they want to sell in India, probably it's always better to have the aspirational goal, get the CE/FDA approved. I think that should be the starting. But having cracked that, even assuming you got a CE/FDA approved product for you, as Charit has mentioned, taking products to global markets, India market probably may be okay, you are in the same country, but many times, even if you have an FDA approved product, it's not a slam dunk. Country by country, you need to register your product. So that could be one more challenge. That means not only the startups are finding it difficult to navigate the regulatory approval. If you want to take this product to the global markets, people who have done this before, very few in this country, probably except maybe one company I could recognize in the medical device world, which reached 1,000 crores. There's hardly any other company, Indian startup, which reached that stage. That means we don't have people who have taken this product to hundreds of countries, who knows how to navigate Italy or Scandinavia or Japan. I think that is the second. Obviously, you need to hire people from abroad. And that could be one more challenge. A startup sitting in Bangalore or Hyderabad, trying to hire a sales head or a marketing head from New York or Japan or London. So that is a second challenge some of the startups are facing at this stage. Yeah.
Ayesha, if I can just add,
Sure.
and Ramesh sir, put a very, very important point up front and center. So I can give you Tricog as an example, right? And if you take a deep tech company, say in Israel versus in India, what would the difference be? And it would be as follows. First, the amount of capital that the company would raise outside of India versus inside of India, huge difference, right? 10x, 15, 20x the difference. And what they do, as Ramesh sir actually said, was they spend years building their product, certifying it, and then going to market. In India, it is slightly lopsided in that way. And that is also that there's immense pressure on all companies to say, hey, you need to show revenue, you need to show growth. So one of the disadvantages is that you enter the market a lot quicker. And as Ramesh sir said, there are very few people who start off by saying, I'm going to get CE/FDA approved. when Tricog started, we didn't have neither the expertise nor the funding. Our focus was how can we grow? How can we capture market share? How's my revenue looking, right? And that compromised the path to CE and FDA. Things like ISO certification. What Geetha said is that companies would start off doing all of these things. A lot of companies in India and even Tricog as well started off with the revenue path, and then at an appropriate time when we had enough funding, enough ability to do this, that's when we did the rest, right? And one other very important point that Ramesh sir said was exporting your product outside of India is always a challenge. It's not a software product that people will just download and use, right? So your ability to scale across the border itself has multiple barriers, as sir beautifully pointed out. Not just CFDA approval, but also every country has in-country registration. Right? Navigating these is a challenge even for us after 7 years. And that ecosystem and infrastructure does not exist in India, right? Because the number of companies that are doing it are small. The government support to do this is non-existent, and it is a significant growth hindrance for companies. So thanks very much, Ramesh sir, for highlighting that point.
So
My
I think
pleasure, Charit.
it's pretty much going to be dependent on the entrepreneurs to take that conscious choice of when to start working on the regulatory approvals alongside their revenue streams as well. So that's a tough one to track, but let's hear from Kiran. What does he think?
Yeah.
How is it in Japan? And, is Japan also as complex as India and other markets?
Probably even more so. But like, I'll take a slightly sort of different perspective, right? We are a global deep tech fund investing across geographies and also across sectors, right? So we invest in all sectors of science and technology, which is like healthcare, life science, also frontier tech like AI, robotics, drones, and so on, and also physical sciences and manufacturing. I have one portfolio here. Tricog is our investment. And I have one anti-portfolio, which is like Niramai, which we looked at it. We could not invest, but they're doing absolutely well. So in that way, we have like both. So I think picking off one thing, I'll also talk about what startups in maybe other countries do well, and also what are the learnings from other sectors which healthcare companies can use. Charit was mentioning one thing which is very important, right? Because they were under the pressure to, like, let's say, probably like look at the revenue and sort of thing. It pushed them into the market probably earlier than their US and Israeli counterparts. That potentially could be an advantage because across the board, product development and customer development went hand in hand for companies like Tricog, whereas most of the US companies raise $100 million, build a lot of product, do a lot of hawa and hoopla and all that, and then release it into the market. So in this case, doing product development and customer development hand, it's never too early to talk to customers, right? Like we have another portfolio company called Bugworks. They're developing a drug for antibiotic resistance and immuno-oncology, but they started doing business development, talking to the pharma companies way before, right in their preclinical studies, and also started talking to doctors. Hey, would you actually use this? Like, would the broad spectrum antibiotics would be important? Do you prefer oral modality or do you prefer like IV modality? So it actually ensures that the product is out in the market quicker so that they can get the feedback. Then you use the real world evidence and also human in loop, whatever it is, to then potentially move towards the regulatory path. I think that is one of the reasons why we like countries coming from emerging countries, startups coming from emerging countries where they have actually products in the market. The second, I think, is we talked about the risks in the companies. So amazing entrepreneurs, like a lot of people feel they are risk takers. I think they are risk killers. Actually, what they do is they identify the risk and like go after them, right? Like Tricog is a good example. The team risk pretty much taken care of. There's a medical doctor, there's an AI engineer, there's a software platform. Niramai is the same example as well. And the second risk that deep tech companies face, and especially in the healthcare, like maybe there are 5 risks, right? Team, technology, market, funding, and regulatory. So the regulatory part, I think like most of the people I'll touch upon the 2 important points. That's the market and in the funding. That is where I think some of the global VCs, especially the US, and we are trying to do that as well, they do 2 things. One, they form powerful syndicates with different complementary investors, somebody who is strong in distribution, like a trading company as an investor, somebody who is strong in maybe a corporate venture capitalist who could potentially lead to other sort of thing, that they do really well. The second thing they do is venture co-creation, right? We work with Arch Ventures. One of the biggest, forget DeepTech, one of the biggest success cases in the last few years is Moderna, right? It came out of incubation by Flagship Pioneering. So we would love to see that sort of venture co-creation where VCs and entrepreneurs both work hand in hand. We see support, of course, entrepreneurs build. I think those are some of the key things that come up. Two more points, which are, I think, important, is setting non-financial KPIs or metrics is super important for deep tech companies. For example, what is the least resistance path to revenue? What are the key inflection points which can help us de-risk this? How do we allocate resources accordingly? So I think that is one of the best things that I think we try to help our portfolio companies by closing across the board. And the last part is the power of platforms, right? So the scale, network effects, switching costs. Like, for example, it's difficult to sell to hospitals, but probably once you are in, you can actually expand and cross-sell and upsell and so on. So using that, if people have not read, they could read a book called 7 Paths by Hamilton Hilmer, which is fantastic. But so how can you use scale, network effects, and switching costs, which are actually traditionally seen in software companies, but doing it for healthcare and life sciences companies? I think that is quite good. So one of our biggest success case in Japan is a company called Peptide Dream, which did a $7 billion IPO. So they have a drug discovery platform. So rather than developing a single drug, they went the platform route and worked with pharma companies to develop many different drugs. So those are some of the things that are coming up. In general, we are super excited about India for one reason only, because deep tech is usually still seen as advanced economy, as some of the people have said, but it should follow the problem at the end of the day, right? So we follow wherever the problem is, so the technology is solving the problem at the end of the day. So yeah, those are some of our learnings across the board.
Thanks,
Ayesha, one comment I want to make.
Yes, please.
I think Geetha very briefly mentioned the importance of clinical trials and key opinion leaders. When compared to any US startup, I'm using the word US as versus Indian startup, one glaring example I see, while some of these needs to go through a clinical trials, but having a R&D partnerships with a top-notch hospital and a top-notch doctor, because all said and in healthcare is old boys club. If I say, assuming the number one endocrinologist in the city, in the country says something, a lot of followers are there, which may not be the case with the adoption of software very democratized. So if you see any US startup or Israeli startup, you definitely see we have R&D partnership with Harvard, Mass General, Mayo Clinic, Stanford's, or any of those top hospitals. We rarely see that. When I say rarely see, that's not that Charit and Geetha are not doing, but in general, so that's a lacuna, I think. So in addition to doing the clinical trials, which are mandatorily needed for the FDA/CE, I think building good R&D partnerships with key hospitals, the best hospitals in the country. I do agree the challenges, unlike in the West, the eagerness with which Indian hospitals are joining startups still hasn't reached the stage what US hospitals are doing. But that's one more step I think which Indian startups should do. I agree with Charit that there's a lot of pressure, show me the revenue. But I think unless Kiran writes bigger checks, the Indian startup should be allowed not just a regulatory pathway, good R&D partnerships, good publications. Getting a publication Lancet, NEGM, I think it makes a world of difference. Automatically, the credibility is different. The marketing in healthcare, it's not a very high quality advertisements. It's probably the acceptance by the doctors. I think some of the Indian startups should look at these soft things, how to market or sell their products.
Thank you, Dr. Ramesh. That was extremely helpful. And in fact, I think this is one unique area where, yes, for deep tech startups, the entrepreneurs really need to work very, very closely with doctors to build those R&D partnerships. Of course, the other risks that Kiran mentioned, technology, market, fund, regulatory, team risks, they're all pretty much existing in other startup areas as well for different sectors. But I guess this R&D partnership is something which is very, very unique to the deep tech area. So just continuing on this thought, I would say that, and I'll come back to Dr. Charit, that, I remember that in the academic research, it's always been about discovery. It may or may not solve a problem, and it may not be even converted into a technology. But in innovation, it's all about need-based research and development. And someone also said, that we have to run after problems. That's the most important thing. So how do you make these boundaries that are existing in India between clinical practice, engineering, design to become more porous while developing a deep tech business? And how important, like Dr. Ramesh already mentioned, but from your experience, because you're a doctor as well, how important and valuable has been the clinical engagement while you built your startup? I mean, it would have just come in naturally to you, but what do you think should be the way for other entrepreneurs who may not have this background in clinical practice?
Aisha, I believe that's actually a pivotal question that would decide the fate of the company. And to be honest, in whichever deep tech space that you would like to be, right, a combination of, for instance, in my case, I was a doctor. My co-founder Zainul is the smartest technology guy that I've ever met, right? And it is only via that synergy that Tricog exists today. And if that boundary, as you rightly said, is not broken down quickly and not co-created together, that is a recipe for disaster. The reason is that each of us, and I'm giving you Tricog's example, each of us brings a very unique perspective, orthogonal perspective to solving that same problem. And this company would not have existed if that combination did not work and work well. So my first and biggest request is, if not a co-founder, but somebody who is there day to day at the creation and execution step in the domain that you need. Now, the challenge is finding the doctor who is willing to do that. And I do believe the blame rests completely with the medical folks. There are very few people like Dr. Ramesh. Dr. Ramesh, I mean, a lot of you may not know, is one of the best cardiologists of India. He is considered God by his patients.
Come on, don't say that.
I mean, I've spoken to some of his patients who would go to him to say, hey, I want my children to get married. I want your permission. Right? Now, the fact that he gave up all of that to work with the ecosystem here sends an example for the rest of us to follow. And the reason, and Sir will speak, and I'm sorry to take a few lines from him, is that there is so much work to be done, and there are so many problems to be solved, and the only way is for other doctors such as me to get out of our comfort zone, as you said, roll up your sleeves and work with the engineers of the world, right? And believe me, the engineers of the world have their heart in the right place, right? They want to solve the problems, right? All they need is help and assistance to work together to solve those problems. So it would take a lot of effort from the medical community and different communities who are on the patient side, and it is us who have to come forward and work with the technology side of the world.
Got it. Thanks, Dr. Charit. Which essentially means that we also need some digital tech solutions to get more of dating apps, but dating for finding co-founders with different experiences and background. I do know of some of them, but I'm sure we have a big problem to solve here to allow doctors to meet engineers to solve problems together.
I'm hoping that and I will take away stuff like Practo, etc. from the list. We do need some very good success stories in India, right? And those success stories will then ignite other doctors to say, hey, that guy did it, and maybe even I can do it. If you would have spoken to my parents 30 years ago, and if they're saying, oh, you're a doctor, wait, hang on a minute, you're going to start a startup, they would have had a heart attack themselves, right? But times are changing, and this is a great opportunity to come together to solve meaningful problems.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we'll just change the topic a bit now and come back to Dr. Geetha and get a sense of, that.
Ayesha, can I make one comment quickly?
Yes, please, Dr. Ramesh, go ahead.
I think I would like to thank Charit for his kind words. But one important point, I think it's a very fundamental question you raised, Ayesha. I think how to make the walls between the clinical practitioners, engineers, and designers. It's absolutely mandatory. For example, I'll give one company we invested, iStem. The founder is a medical doctor, but he's more a businessman. He was running a global clinical trials organization for 20 years. The second person is an ophthalmologist / PhD. Probably there may be 5 or 10 ophthalmologists in this country with a PhD degree. She's a PhD in retina from Germany. The third one is a molecular biologist. So these people are basically trying to engineer the stem cells to become retinal pigment epithelial cells. So a medical doctor / clinical trials expert who ran a business for 20 years, and a doctor. And if you have to bet on that company. Whether they succeed or not is different. If there's one team which can solve that, it is a team like that. The second point I want to emphasize here, definitely every startup should do that. But at the policy level, government has to do also this. For example, unlike in the West, dual degrees are very common. Engineering plus MBA, engineering plus medicine. IIT Kharagpur talked about it 15 years back. IIT Hyderabad talked about it 10 years back. Last week, I think there's an announcement by the Indian Institute of Science, 800-bed hospital, 2 founders from Mindtree. They want to give a dual engineering / medical degree. I think that's the kind of programs we need for really to a deep tech, especially in healthcare, to take off. So it's a very fundamental question. Definitely, we need teams with that kind of a domain expertise in different areas. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Ramesh. Yes, thank you.
Just if I may quickly add just one quick point on that, we've been also seeing hospitals open up open innovation sort of divisions to work with startups. For example, there is one hospital called Sakura Hospital, which is started by 2 Japanese large corporations, Seikam and Toyota Susho. Has been doing an interesting job. The IISc super specialty hospital that Dr. Ramesh alluded to could be an example. Max Healthcare and Tata has been doing that as well to an extent. Apollo has been doing that slowly. So those are some of the things we are seeing, not just in India, but across the board as well. So that is like sort of one good. And that is also pioneered by some of the healthcare systems going on the cloud, right? You see Benchling and Viva Systems kind of billion-dollar companies being built on that. So that's in general, they're also getting used to, working with the data and working with the startups in general. So that's a good outcome in a way.
And if I may add, to this conversation, because it's a very important point that Dr. Ramesh brought in, to have this sort of marriage between the tech and the sort of the doctor, clinical person. So one way, the startups who are listening, right, you may be wondering, oh my God, how do I get a doctor co-founder, or the other way around, right? So one way we have been able to successfully do is to actually sort of, really get consulting radiologists, right? Because radiologists generally consult to multiple hospitals. It's the same with the clinicians, because I come from a PhD, and I'm a tech PhD doctor, but it's a kind of a different kind of doctor, right? But then we definitely need a clinical. So we have multiple radiologists, who spend considerable amount of time, fixed, every week and so on. So it's very much part of the building. And most of the time, what we are doing with them is to sort of brainstorm on how the product has to evolve and so on and so forth. That's another way, right? To get, clinical people, come into your tech startup if you're a techie.
Yeah. And India itself has a good small success case, but a very meaningful success case in CCamp. I think Dr. Ramesh alluded to iStem. We have invested in Bugworks. In general, CCamp has done a very good job of trying to set those companies with, hey, you don't just do clinical trials in India, you also generate, I don't know, from pharma in China, from, Quants in UK and somewhere in South Africa. So to bring about like credibility I think that, and also pushing companies towards publication, and the BIRAC grant, which helps companies get started. So I think CCAMP is one good success case, which hopefully can be scaled up across. So yeah.
Yes, yes. I think we have lots of very interesting pockets of excellence where such examples crop up. But I think our challenge as a country has been to be able to scale them up and attract the masses to really follow similar examples. But like we discussed that yes, different experiences do make a difference. I'm going to come to Dr. Geetha and also understand if gender also is still making any difference when it comes to deep tech entrepreneurship, especially. I know it becomes a little tough one to crack, but still have things evolved, have things changed, and how it is today? And any piece of advice that you'd like to give, especially to the women entrepreneurs in the audience, that will be very inspirational.
Yes, definitely it's harder. I won't hide it, right? It's definitely harder. Right, in this audience, I'm sure, there's considerable percentage of people who think, can really women be as equal then as men in solving technical deep tech problems? Oh, what do you mean? Techie? What do you mean? High challenges? So I'm sure there's always this, a percentage of people who are kind of biased with that. And I found many of them that way. But one thing, and it's not just in sort of startup world or entrepreneurship, even in the tech ladder, when you try to sort of, I've been the only member on the board and so on and so forth in my previous organization, the whole room, only 2 people out of the whole class in MTech and so on, right? And ISC and so on. So these things are very, very common. Just sort of go with the flow. It's an opportunity, So one thing I always advise, female entrepreneurs who come to me is that forget your gender. It's so important to forget your gender, right? You should never ever make that come in front of you, or you just go as a person, and you're representing everywhere as a person. You need to forget. Only then you'll be able to give 100%, right? The receivers would be of different quality, that's fine, and different level of reception capability, that's fine. So it's fine that you may have maybe 50 to 70% of the audience and not 100%, that's fine. But forget the gender, go for it. Because there are also a percentage of people who want to promote female entrepreneurship. There's also many people, male and female, who want to look at the equity, and which is gender equity, which is actually that segment is growing now. Right now, people want to support it, and that's a good news, right? Because in the career itself, I've seen that in the early parts of my career versus now, there's definitely more acceptance for female entrepreneurs, female senior leaders, supported as well. But for the ladies, I'll say forget the gender. That's the only piece of advice I'll give.
I think
that also probably in healthcare, when compared to any other industry, women, whether at various levels, quite common actually, whether it is clinicians, whether it is administrators, nurse administrators. So probably the only thing is, as Geetha has said, transforming, or for that matter, science graduates. A lot of people are there in MSc, PhD, but becoming business leaders, that's where probably Geetha is emphasizing. That's a good point. Just ignore who you are. And, yeah.
I think healthcare is a lot about empathy as well. And I don't know if it is gene wired or no, but definitely studies do indicate that women are inclined more towards empathy.
Improving situation. Yeah.
Yes, that's amazing. And in fact, I also remember that, when we started out 2012, it was very tough for my family to explain to people outside that what am I really doing? But now times have definitely changed. And like I said, startups is considered a very fashionable and cool career option, which is also a good thing. At least more people are taking risks. That's good to know. So in the interest of time, I'll come down to maybe I have 2 more questions, and maybe I'll quickly just come to Kiran for my next question, where I want to get a sense of how is the ecosystem evolving, especially around the funding landscape for deep tech ecosystem across the world. I mean, yes, India has seen some growth, but what do you believe needs to be done in the next 5 years to really put in a lot of funding into such startups in India? What kind of initiatives do you think, and what kind of initiatives will be required?
Yeah, I think the 2010 decade, that sort of thing was more of consumer tech, right? So that was the version 1 of Indian startup ecosystem. Version 2, currently what you're seeing is the SaaS waves, right? You see the fresh works of that sort of becoming unicorns and going public and delivering exit outcomes. But version 3, what is sort of upcoming is deep tech, right? So India has confluence of 4 things. Maybe the only country that has confluence of 4 things. It's the only developing country that can, or one of the few developing countries that can parallel Silicon Valley level innovation, still at an affordable cost structure. Third, it has a domestic B2B market which could potentially parallel China, but at the same time, unlike Chinese companies, India also has elements of Israel where Indian companies can go global. So because of that, so all the investors who are looking for alpha, and are looking for like meaningful, and what one thing COVID has done is a lot of people in general, customers, companies, investors have realized that like, well, if we are not going to put money behind hard problems, things are not going to get better, right? So it's called like the black swan events can change a lot of things. And probably like there's a lot of talk around purely from an investment perspective, forget like all the meaningful like or problem solving and the intellectual curiosity that goes with it. When markets go up and down, which are the companies that are kind of like less affected, so to speak, are actually deep tech companies are more resilient in general, right? So that I think is sort of popping up. One thing we'd like to see is like maybe 2 things or 3 things from a policy wise. First is slowly Indian stock exchange is emerging as quite interesting for startups to go public. However, for deep tech companies, as all of maybe Niramai, Tricog, everyone else would indicate, significant market is abroad. So I think we've been proposing a lot of other funds as well. Can you allow Indian deep tech companies to, actually go global, which makes it could go public globally, which makes it easier. As you've seen, there are a bunch of SPACs and others which have driven some good outcomes. So that is like giving sort of like more focus to the Indian ecosystem. So in that, we are very interesting. And second, India is super strong at the intersection of technology and the local problems and the operational efficiency that comes with it. If probably it works in India, it might work in Southeast Asia, it might work in maybe Africa as well, with some sort of support. And by collaborating with, like, for example, R&D collaboration with Japan, distribution collaborating with US, it could be scaled globally. So a lot of investors that we talk to, and we firmly believe that whatever comes out of India, the innovation can solve 5 billion problem of 5 billion people, the bottom 5 billion people. So that is becoming more and more prominent. So there are that combined with the talent pool coming out, I think is driving a lot of interesting outcomes. So we are very passionate about like platform companies, like focusing on privacy preserving computing, neural computing, where brain emerges as a new field. Second is ability to create simulation environments. Like lack of data is always talked about in healthcare, right? Like real world data. Can you use AI and simulation to actually cut down the time of clinical trial, or create digital twins, which has been used in manufacturing? Similar to that, can you improve some of the clinical outcomes? So I think those things are emerging strongly from India. So we are super happy. The other thing that India has is the full stack talent, right? So I think nurturing more of that. So the business talent, plus the medical and sort of like technology talent, plus there is a talent regarding UI and US and UI user experience, which actually in healthcare, some of the companies struggle for that, right? So better user experience itself could be a competitive advantage, not just the technology by itself. So I think leveraging that sort of full stack talent and building more interdisciplinary team, that is possible in India to an extent. So I think those are some of the things. The missing pieces, I think all of them clearly articulated already. So we expect a lot of money going into not just healthcare, but in general, the broader deep tech ecosystem, including healthcare and life sciences. So yeah.
Thanks, Kiran. So I would summarize that by saying that there isn't poverty of big money for deep tech, but there's actually poverty of big ideas, which are actually core deep tech, and where you really get a lot of interdisciplinary work done and big problems solved from India, which I'm sure.
One small problem though, beyond Series B is still a challenge. That is something that we ourselves face. Like if we write Series A, who writes Series B is a question. So that's a challenge that sort of still is unsolved. We'll see how it get there. Yeah.
Okay. We're pretty much nearing the end of the session, and therefore I'll just now pose out a last final question to each one of you, where we would like you to share at least one key takeaway for our aspiring deep tech healthcare entrepreneurs that we have in the audience, who are intending to go big in India and become global players, and they really dream to transform the way healthcare is delivered. So what's your one final piece of advice for them? Dr. Charit, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. And I have a few important thoughts, and I've spent a little while thinking about it. And if I was to go back and start a company now, I would start it in India. Number two, I would build in India and scale abroad. And the third important message, which I want to give all of you, is that it is a decades journey. And these are the three messages that, I'm sorry, not one, but three important messages that I would like to tell everybody here.
Great. Thank you. That was extremely valuable. Dr. Geetha?
Yeah, I want to say two things. One is don't underestimate the importance of systematic clinical studies. If you're a health tech company, you have to do that now, right? If you have not done it. And it's not something that you do in your lab. It has to be systematic, blinded, randomized, if possible, kind of study. Never, ever underestimate. That's more like a tangible. Second thing, you've heard a lot of challenges around this table today, but that should not deter you. It is really worth it. It's so much of learning and fulfilling experience. If you're thinking about solving a problem deeply, just jump, you'll figure out how to swim. That's my second advice.
Thank you. Dr. Ramesh, over to you.
I think my message is, I think COVID has really shrunk the period from 10 years to 1 year. The digital transformation or digital acceptance by the patients, the doctors and hospitals probably drastically changed in the last 1 year, whether it's US, Europe or India. The second point was, if you're in a deep tech, I'm sure, you can't say I'll build a product for South India or North India. It has to be a global company from the day one. I think your mindset, if a product works in India, it will work anywhere else. I think if you want to be a deep tech entrepreneur, you have to think global from the day one, whether it's regulatory, whether going after the markets, and accordingly you have to build your teams. But having said that, combining 1 and 2, I think there's no other better day than today to start up. And as Charit has said, we want a billionaire health tech startup entrepreneur from this country. That will inspire a lot of people. In fact, I have 2 seniors in my college, a small town, Guntur, and their children, one of them was founder of Darwin Box, a unicorn, and the other one was Falcon X, which is a cryptocurrency, multi-billion-dollar unicorn. But unfortunately, they're not in healthcare. Even though their parents are doctors, the children were able to do unicorns in a non-health. But I would like to see, in fact, I always say, if a professor from IIC had made $200 million out of a startup, that will inspire his colleagues, his juniors, his students to start up. And I'm sure in the days to come, we want people like Charit or Geetha to be the role models. While they're good academically, but people see money as the most important criteria. So we need those success stories to inspire the next generation. But having said that, today is the best time to do a startup in healthcare.
Perfect. Sounds very, very promising. Thanks, Dr. Ramesh. We have one question from audience that I'll come to later, but after Kiran also shares his thoughts, I just wanted to point that out, that we'll spend maybe 5 more minutes. Thanks.
Yeah, very quickly. I think we touched upon a lot of things, thinking about different sources of funding, not just VC funding, non-dilutive funding and other things that I think we did not talk about it. That's one good thing. The other thing I have, especially for early startup, is one thing, product market fit. I think a lot of people talk about, but for deep tech in general, what might be important is the pain technology fit. What is the customer pain you're solving? Does your technology work? Is your technology the right one to solve this problem? As long as that is clear, deep tech companies are $0 billion companies. It means if you do it, you're gonna get there. So it's like I think a lot of people said, like a famous mathematician Hardy said of Ramanujan, that Srinivasa Ramanujan left a garden. Every time he came to the garden, he found fresh flowers blooming. I feel like that every time I come back to India, I find so many amazing things. So I think we are super positive about it. And the power of role models, I think some of those are already here. So that one thing is going to change a lot of things coming forward. So yeah, no better time to build the next decade is of India deep tech especially.
Thank you, Kiran. So which means definitely the time is now. The country is India. We just need to put in the pieces together and we are ready to go big and global. That's amazing. We have one question from the audience from Lakshay Sahni, who's asking Kiran and Dr. Ramesh both that what is your opinion on neurotech BCI for neuropsychiatric illness or mental health? And is UTEC and Endiya, are they looking at this sector as well? And what kind of challenges do you foresee? If you could just maybe very quickly summarize your thoughts. Dr. Ramesh, would you go first?
Sure. I think it's a very high sounding word, but brain-computer interface, BCIA, we have seen examples of paralyzed patients being implanted with devices walking. These are all fabulous, but again, it needs deep science. If someone has a real great tech, we are definitely open at looking at those opportunities. But definitely, it needs a lot of hard work, a lot of innovation in device and clinical trials, thought leadership, partnerships, publications. But definitely, if the person who asked this question, Lakshay Sani, has something interesting, we definitely would like to look at it.
Great. So I'm sure he'll connect with you. Kiran, your thoughts?
Yeah, super interesting. As I said, I think I'm generally interested in what's beyond like singularity in general. So one of the things is the ultimate way is for us to communicate with machines in some way. And we've looked at like multiple things, non-invasive, semi-invasive, invasive BCIs. I think the overarching point of this panel was that like, how can you build credibility from day one? So building that credibility, even if you are doing invasive or whatever it is, building that credibility and the ability to replicate that results. If those things happen, I think we are super interested, and especially going after which are the first 1 or 2 disease indications, like maybe spinal cord injury is one, or maybe something else is another. So I think that is if that is then we are super interested. But the challenges remain, because the challenges is of signal amplification, wireless technologies, which are non-healthcare related. So those are some of the challenges. But in general, we are very interested.
So great, which means in short, Lakshay should definitely reach out to both of you. Lakshay has also asked a quick question from both Dr. Charit and Dr. Geetha, which is that your products have been a combination of hardware, software. So, and he does say that hardware is very tough in India. So what kind of challenges did you face while working on both simultaneously, and how do you overcome them? Dr. Charit?
Thanks. And, he does make a very valid point, is that India does not have a hardware ecosystem. And unlike China, which has a very, very clear-cut process of from design to layout to PCB to manufacturing, I think we have still a way to go before we reach that level of scale where you put in a board and then it comes out, day after tomorrow and ready to test. I do believe that we are moving in the right direction. Now, the question is of vital importance, because anything you want to do with healthcare will involve the human body in one way or another. And that interface is usually hardware. So doing things with hardware have multiple challenges. I'm sure Geetha will highlight them. But this is a problem that can be overcome. It is far more challenging from the design to the manufacturing to the testing phases. But there is some phenomenal talent in India for hardware design, right? And it could be from chip design to board layouts. I do believe we have the talent, human talent, that is needed for us to excel in this. The other ecosystem is slowly being built. Geetha, I'm sure you have a very unique perspective on this.
Oh, thanks, Dr. Charit. Actually, yes. So we have a kind of unique strategy at Niramai for this, I would say. This is possibly taken as learning. Yes, we do AI and thermal imaging for detecting breast cancer screening, and nobody else in the world does this, right? So it has its own challenges. There's no data to start with and all that. So on day one, we had to get to the data. There was no time to build the hardware, right? Because for one reason is we didn't want to spend time on something that was not our core competency. Second, we said, how can we use off-the-shelf devices, right, to start with, so that we can get the data we want and then start working on our core competency, which is the AI model, right? So with that, Even currently, whatever we sell is off-the-shelf US FDA approved, CE approved thermal imaging devices, coupled with our software, which is cloud hosted, which is the AI-based software that we have built. Now, recently, maybe in last 6 months or so, we are getting into hardware as well. And the reason for that is to bring down the cost further and furthermore, right, for Indian and such developing countries, right? And here there are actually some accelerators, accelerators and biotech incubators who focus mostly on hardware only type of. And I'm happy to state and call out one such partner, which is AMTZ, who are helping us, Andhra Medical Technology Zone. Helping is not really coming in and doing the hardware for us, but just giving that confidence that there is this ecosystem, going and sitting there, seeing others doing it, right, is also very, very helpful. Dr. Jitendra Sharma ji and so on. So that's where we've started the medical device building also, and now in the last 6 months, so that we can bring down the cost to such a small level that hopefully it can become a breast health measuring device. So for that, you definitely need to get into the hardware, and we're trying to do that.
And also, I have a feeling that pure medical device innovation will be impossible in healthcare. I think a software wrapper or AI wrapper will become mandatory. Going forwards, any new interesting idea will be a combination of medical device with an overlay of.
Yeah. Another thing on the regulatory side, if I know we are out of time, is that once we now know how to do a US FDA for our device, how to do a CE approval for our software device, we are more confident about, of course, hardware ko kar sakte. I mean, it's not like a big deal. Is what, now we have the confidence of going into the space, which was not our core competency also. So, it is possible to build, but
takes time,
takes
patience, and of course, yes, it's a tough journey, but definitely possible. Great, that's wonderful. I'll open up the session for the participants as well, in case they want to directly connect with or direct any questions to the panelists. We can maybe just wait for a couple of seconds if anybody wants to unmute and just ask a question to a panelist.
Ayesha, there's one more question on the Q&A.
Okay, I'll just take a look at that. Yes, there is a question from Geetha Manjunath. How about predictive diagnostics technology? What are the challenges and opportunities, opinions on such tech? So maybe Dr. Charit should take that based on his experience.
Thanks. And diagnostics, as you know, is your ability to detect something that is there. And there's a wide range of spectrum of traditional technologies and newer age technologies that are able to detect diseases as they're happening. But predictive abilities, that is using different newer modalities, and the newest kid on the block is deep neural networks, to be able to piece together diverse data sets and come out with a prediction of something that is going to happen just from learning is going to be tremendously important. Now, all of us know about the hype of it. There is also a caveat before I go forward, that these in routine clinical practices is still challenging, right? And it is challenging because they work very well with one set of data, but when you bring them out in the real world, you have multiple complexities that the neural nets have not been trained on. But other than this caveat, the use of these technologies is, for a doctor, like black magic, right? And let me give you an example of what we do in our own algorithms. From a standard ECG, which is an electrical signal, we are able to say, hey, there is a patient that has a weak heart or a low ejection fraction, a diagnosis prior to this that can only be made by doing an echo. So bringing together two modalities and pairing them, and after training being able to predict what the second modality will do based on the first, is to me like black magic, right? It is something that humans cannot do. if you were to give me an ECG and say, okay, take a look at this ECG and tell me which one of these patients have a low ejection fraction, the answer is, there is no human way of doing that. But these new technologies that are there will definitely transform, or at least take India for an example, is that an ECG is a test that can be done practically everywhere. An echo is a much more difficult test to administer, which is not widely available. But if while using a predictive model, if I'm able to even identify some of these people and they get treated or they enter the care pathway, it is a huge, huge value to what medicine has. So from your ability to diagnose, I do believe that technologies will be common of prediction. The challenge lies, of course, in gathering data and gathering outcomes data on which you can train these models. And India, and the biggest reason why you will find multiple publications coming from the West, as Ramesh sir said, you will have Mayo paper, you will have Cleveland paper, you will have Mass General paper. The reason is they have the data in the EMR form where they can do these correlations practically, ready-made, right? So the challenge in India and for deep tech startups who work only with India is your ability to gather paired data sets, your ability to annotate these data sets. The good news is that we have lots of data and you have some fantastic people who can work on them.
One more good news is also that I think recently, just about a couple of days ago, a draft policy has also been launched, which talks about data sharing. So I'm sure things are moving in a positive.
And there are I think open data movement where curating sort of data sets, that's good as well. And some of those, Stanford and Mayo Clinic and others, they have also started open sourcing their data. So I think the largest data for protein folding was uploaded recently, and that sort of thing that adds some use as well.
I just want to add on the kind of tech that a predictive technology can sort of, when you say predictive solutions, right? The kind of tech that is sort of enabling this is one, of course, we could have sort of reinforcement learning and so on and so forth, where you're looking at multiple time varying data and you're trying to predict in the future, right? It could be coming in from wearable devices and so on and so forth. There's also actually an insight, that we got, and I thought that's why I thought it would be useful, is when we talk about early detection, for many diseases, it's almost prediction. I know I would like people to think about it much more. And it's early detection, how small a lesion, a cancer lesion you can detect is almost like definitive prediction of something that's going to be sort of, palpable, like in breast cancer screening. We are able to detect 4 millimeters of cancer, which probably will take 2 years to become a lump, and then you go to a doctor. So is it prediction? Yes, it is like a sure shot prediction or something like that, right? So that is one. And of course, risk assessment is the other type of predictive things that, where there is a probability of getting a disease, right? So these are some 2-3 things that people should think about and try to bracket their, predictive solutions so that you know exactly what kind of tech to use and what kind of messaging you want to do and what kind of integration with the cancer or a care pathway that the product will fit. Right?
Sure.
A very interesting question, and I think the panelists also, especially Charit's comment, ECG, ability to diagnose heart failure. But what could be far more interesting to the entrepreneurs here is the Ayushman Bharat digital machine. Right now, government is going to be a little soft, asking the people to voluntarily recruit themselves, patient ID, doctor ID, hospital ID. But once they take a carrot and a stick approach, make every healthcare provider, please provide the data in a digital format. Then I think you have huge data lakes. And I'm sure, like the example Dr. Charit gave from ECG, you can diagnose heart failure, which no cardiologist can even imagine. It's a black box for me. And I'm sure with that kind of data you may get from Ayushman Bharat digital machine, it may open up fabulous opportunities for entrepreneurs. In what way, I don't know. But in the next 5 years, there's a great solutions can come up based upon the data sitting on the ABDM.
Thank you so much. I think this was extremely valuable, very enriching. We are all tempted to take the conversation forward, but I guess we don't want to keep everyone away from their dinner. I'm also getting an indication from Manish that we need to wrap up now. So with that, I think I'll just say that deep tech in healthcare is exciting would be an understatement. It's absolutely revolutionary and transformative for India and the world. So thank you so much, Dr. Charit, Dr. Geetha, Dr. Ramesh, and Kiran for this wonderful conversation. I'll hand it back to Manish. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you,
Aisha.
Aisha. Well moderated.